David, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Tom. This is a real pleasure.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to have you on. So Long Strange Trip is a film about one of rock's most iconic bands, the story of its members, and the people who enabled the Grateful Dead to be the juggernaut that it was. But it's also a film about fans. David Lemeiux, you're the Dead's archivist, you're the legacy manager, but I should say first and foremost, from the first time you came in just a couple of minutes ago, and I said, yeah, I'm a fan of the Dead, and you kind of sparked right up, because I can tell you're a fan as well. How did you discover the Grateful Dead?
Huge fan. Like a lot of us, and we talked about this in the movie, older brother.
Right.
Older brother came back from school, and I was 14 in 1984. Think of the music in 84. And it was Duran Duran and
Flock of Seagulls?
Flock of Seagulls, and there were bands that just did not resonate with me. So I was just getting into music, and I was learning about culture, 13, 14, and I was resonating towards Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix and these bands. My brother comes, if you like those, you got to hear this Grateful Dead band. And he gave me an album. And
what album was it?
It was Skeletons from the Closet, a greatest hits album, 1974. And the first song, I'd never heard anything like this. I said, this is the band for me. And then I explored them a little more in 84. And then by 85, I had all the albums. And then I learned about tape trading. And a friend's older brother was a tape trader, hooked me up with live shows. And I said, oh man, this is good music. And I realized I could listen to 20 live shows and nothing was the same. And I said, okay, this is the one for me.
When you say it's good music, what was it about the music that grabbed you?
The authenticity, where you could listen to a song and it could be pretty mediocre. And then the very next song, the frenzy point. I refer to the Dead hitting this frenzy point several times in a live show, where when you're at a concert and the music is authentic and it's happening and you put your fist in the air, you can't help but put your fist in the air and freak out. And that was happening on every tape I heard at 1 or 2 points or at 10 points or the entire show. But I realized it was authentic, and there could be bad shows, and there could be bad songs within a great show, and there could be great songs within a bad show, and everything was different. And you could listen to, there's a song, Shakedown Street, for example, and every single version of that is so different. And it's not just Dead had nuance different. Oh, you can hear, Jerry played a different note there. It's dramatically different every single time they played it. And that's what I loved about it, that there was nothing the same. And then when I went to my first show and there was this go away and join the circus kind of vibe, and I said, this is for me. I was 16 years old at my first show in Hartford, Connecticut. And I said, this is the scene for me. And I literally stopped listening to all music around 16 years old until I was probably about 21, didn't listen to anything but the Grateful Dead.
But the Grateful Dead. I want to play you a track right now. This is some of the Dead's music from 1970, and this was my introduction to the Grateful Dead as a country music fan. This is the Grateful Dead and Uncle John's Band.
Well, the first days are the hardest days, don't you worry anymore. 'Cause when life looks like easy street, there is danger at your door. Think this through with me.
That right there is the Grateful Dead with Uncle John's Band, written for a fellow named John Cohen. Is that right? John Cohen from the New Lost City Ramblers.
So it seems, yeah. A terrific song.
Great song from the 1970 album Working Man's Dead. There's a new documentary screening at Hot Docs about the group called The Long Strange Trip, and we're speaking to the Grateful Dead's archivist, David Lemeiux. That was my way in. I was a Fish fan, and then I wanted to know where that came from, and so then I got into the Dead, sort of, but then my brother introduced me to Candyman, because he was playing in a cover band, and I played bass, and we played Candyman together from the Grateful Dead's American Beauty record, which was kind of you could talk about it in the film a bit of their country music era, their kind of back out to nature era. And more importantly, it was the era where they kind of streamlined their sound. So what goes through your mind when you hear Uncle John's Band?
It's exactly that. I often refer to the Dead in certain periods as transitional Dead. And if you listen to the Dead a year before Working Man's Dead, it was right in the heart of primal Grateful Dead, psychedelic Grateful Dead, songs like Dark Star and the other one. And they made a very conscious choice to. It was largely.
I want to point out that the other one is a name of a song. If you're listening to this hearing, it's like Dark Star and the other one.
The other one.
There's only 2 Grateful Dead songs.
The other one. And so they moved from this psychedelic. Dick Laudvala, my predecessor, my mentor, called it Primal Grateful Dead, and they moved from that to this, which was really a return to where the Grateful Dead came from. You look at Jerry coming from a bluegrass background, going back to 1961, 62. Jerry was primarily a banjo player.
Yeah.
And Bobby was a folk guitar player. And Phil was a classical avant-garde composer. So you have all these elements of, and Pigpen was a blues harmonica player. And you've got all these incredible elements coming together. So they returned to where they came from, and they'd been spending 5 or 6 months in the studio recording their albums, and it was just too much. They wanted to get on the road. They wanted to bring it down. They wanted to focus on vocals, which you just heard at Uncle John's band, and they put a lot of work into it, and I think it was hugely successful in terms of they liked those albums, and that was important.
The idea, though, of the albums at all can seem kind of passé, because I think when I first started listening to the Grateful Dead, and when you do start listening to the Grateful Dead, you get these greatest hits records, and you might even hear Touch of Grey, you might hear one of the big hits, and then you realize that the true beauty of being a Grateful Dead fan is not the recordings at all, the studio recordings at all, it's the live recordings. So just explain a little bit to me about the philosophy of the band when it came to recording music versus playing live.
I think that the studio albums were an obligation. They had to. They had record deals, they had to sell some records, they had to put new product out. And they became less important. If you look at 1980 being an album called Go to Heaven, they didn't put another album out until 1987. In the last 15 years of Grateful Dead, there were 2 studio records.
Right.
And the first, there was a lot of records in the beginning. It wasn't as prolific as David Bowie putting out 13 records in 9 years.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything like that, but they put out a lot of albums as, I think, an obligation. When 1966, when they signed with Warner Brothers, it was all about getting a record deal. And then they had to then put out records every year almost. Then they did their own record company where it was just more about being able to do it themselves. And then they did Arista, and that's when it slowed down a lot. And they realized that their strength was in the live performance. That's where the authentic Grateful Dead came out. That's where they could succeed or fail on any given night, but it didn't matter. It was that they put that effort forth, and more often than not, they succeeded. But when it failed, their fans were very forgiving, and that's where the magic happened, in the live setting, and it never really hit for them in the studio. I love the Dead studio records. I think they're really good. They do have a bad rap because they were so good live, and they were known as a live band. And even through the 70s, you could look that they had until midnight to play every night because that's what they did. A promoter couldn't say you got to get off stage at 10 o'clock. Mm-hmm. You don't have 2.5 hours. You've got 5 hours to play if you want.
Right.
And so the Grateful Dead were a live band, and that's where they got off. And the movie was largely, as you saw, about having fun. And Jerry talks about this. All he wanted to do was have fun. He
realized that art ultimately is not permanent. Like you can't keep anything forever, so you might as well just have fun while you're alive.
Exactly. And for Jerry, that record was that thing that was forever. And like the Watts Towers, it's there. That's the art. That's what you leave behind. But in that live moment, that's where you get to have fun. And the band had a ton of fun playing live.
It's remarkable to see the band's philosophy in this film be shown through their history in particular. And I think this is when people hear the Grateful Dead who maybe aren't as familiar with them. They think about the 60s counterculture. They think about the acid tests of Ken Casey and the Merry Pranksters. So more than most other bands at the time, the Dead were really embraced that scene, and in many ways were a product of that early Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco, and the introduction of LSD into youth culture. And it was an important part of who they were as a group. So how did those times, how did the counterculture, how did psychedelics, how did that era impact the Grateful Dead?
I think if you look at 1966, when the Dead they started in 65, but when they really started playing a lot in 66, remember LSD was still legal until late 66, I think. I think we just passed the 50th anniversary of it becoming illegal. So it was a legal drug at the time, and the Grateful Dead were the house band of these parties called acid tests. And these parties would be in warehouses, in arenas, whatever they were in big rooms, and the Dead were the house band. But because people were there as the show themselves. If you paid your $1 admission to go in, you were part of the show. And so the Grateful Dead, even though they were the house band, they had no pressure to play. Mm-hmm. And this is what they talk about in the movie, that it gave them the freedom to either play a 20-minute version of a song or play 1 minute and then stop playing because people weren't paying to go see them.
But what about the effects of the drugs themselves? Like, how did taking LSD and the psychedelic reaction to LSD influence their performance?
I think it allowed them that freedom. I think anybody who has done LSD, knows that it's a mind-opening drug. It's not, and they talk about this alcohol being and heroin and things being drugs that kind of make you want to be isolated. Right. And LSD is the complete opposite of that. And creatively, it does the same thing where it allows you to be incredibly creative. Whether you're talented or not doesn't matter. And the Grateful Dead, thankfully, were extremely talented, but your creativity is given complete freedom to express itself.
But that was the only real controversial moment I saw in the the whole documentary, which was when I can't remember who it was, but it was one journalist says, like, you can go see the Grateful Dead sober, but if you go to see it while you're taking psychedelics, you're going to enjoy it so much more. And I didn't necessarily think that was fair, because I think there's a lot of people who can enjoy the Grateful Dead's music and can enjoy a Dead and Company concert without any drugs in their system.
Absolutely. I've seen plenty. I saw the Dead over 100 times, and the bulk of those shows were sober and straight and completely, and I enjoyed the heck out of them. And in fact, a lot of those shows are the ones that I can right now look back on shows that I saw 25, 30 years ago and have better memories of those because I could be more focused on it and not I could be more in the moment of what was going on as opposed to having this mind-expanding moment.
Playing live really did become the Dead's calling card. I want to play a track now that comes up. I love, in the documentary, it comes up twice. The story of how the track was recorded live is it comes up, and then kind of serendipitously, later on, a huge Deadhead brings it up as their avenue into the band. So this is from the Europe 72 record. This is the Grateful Dead and Morning Dew.
Today can't walk you out in the morning, do my honey.
I'm trying to be an impartial journalist here and not talk about how much I love that. I love that recording so much. That is the Grateful Dead and Morning Dew from their live album, Europe 72. We're speaking to the band's archivist and legacy manager, David Lemeiux. This track comes up time and time again in this new documentary, Long Strange Trip. You were the music supervisor for the film. Why was it so important to include Morning Dew in this doc?
Morning Dew, as a person who saw a lot of Dead shows, was one of those songs that we called it chasing. So let's say, and Steve Silberman in the movie talks about this, that if you saw 6 shows on a tour but missed the 7th, they played songs that you wanted to see. And you'd be like, oh, why did I miss that 7th show? And Morning Dew is one of those songs where you chased it. And when you got to see Morning Dew, now remember, the Dead did not play a set list. So you could see 20 Dead shows and not see Morning Dew once. But then when you got to see it, it was a very special moment.
Well, why?
It was, again, I bring up the word authenticity. And when the Dead played Morning Dew, it generally meant they were having a good night. It always came at the end of the show. It was never a first set song. It was never a beginning of the second set song. It was always an end of the show song. And when they played it, you could be pretty darn sure. Yeah, you know, and another thing is when the Dead were playing really well, you could feel it. You could say, tonight's a Morning Dew night, and they'd do it.
Really?
And there were nights for sure that I saw shows that were so good, you just knew the Dew was coming. And they might not have played it in 10 shows, so they were kind of due for the Dew, but you knew it, and then they'd go into it, and it was a massive release when they went into it. And it's a song that is so perfect for the Grateful Dead, because the Grateful Dead are such a dynamic band. They're a band that in any given song can go from 2 miles per hour to 60 and then right back down to 2. And you're hearing it now in Morning Dew. And Morning Dew is one of those songs that really represents the dynamics that the Grateful Dead were capable of, where they could play so quietly and then bring it up to the frenzy point. And it's a huge release at the end of the song. We've got a new show coming out on CD from Cornell University, big Grateful Dead famous show. And there's a Morning Dew. It's the definitive live version. And I've heard that version 100 times more.
Yeah.
Every single time, goosebumps. Yeah. Every single time.
I love Jerry's confidence in this version of it too. The band's playing kind of tentatively, and Jerry just sings so confidently. Anyway, we could talk about it forever. I want to talk about fans. This is there's an umbrella, of course, term for fans of the Grateful Dead, of Deadheads. But what I didn't know until I saw this documentary, and what you won't know until you see the documentary, is that there are different kinds of Deadheads. And in the film, it groups them into a Buddhist mandala. Can you break down the different Deadheads you'd see at a Grateful Dead show?
Yeah, and I was a few of them at different times. I was primarily, of the shows I saw, for most of them, I was a taper. Now, the Grateful Dead allowed taping. And that's not just bringing in a Walkman or an iPhone now and hitting record. This was elaborate microphones on 12-foot high microphone stands and $3,000 recording devices. And we were making really good audience tapes. Mine weren't very good, but they were fun. I loved the document. I loved the archival document, driving away from the show that night and listening to tonight's show. That was a thrill for me. So that was what I did. Then there were the spinners. These are the people who might not have even gone into the actual bowl of the arena and hung out in the hallways, where the Dead would put speakers in the hallways. So when you're walking around the concourse getting your popcorn and your Coke, they would have speakers out there and there'd be people dancing out there. And these were people, in the movie, as they say, it was a borderline religious experience.
Yeah, at one point they say they were lying on the ground because they thought Jerry Garcia was a prophet.
It was a prophet.
Is that true?
Not for me, but for some people it was. And that was the nice thing, that all these different elements of deadheads, you had the preppy deadheads, you had the weekend deadheads who had jobs or families or high-level education that they couldn't get away in the middle of the week and go on tour like we could in high school. Missing a week wasn't too hard, but there were definitely people that I would see that were somewhere that I wasn't. And I envied that. And that was the nice thing about the Dead scene, is that you had all these different branches, and it was like a microcosm of any society where you've got everybody. You've got students and people with jobs and people in suits and people like us who aren't in suits. And it was like that at a Dead show, and everybody was okay with everybody else. And it was just part of that world. But there's only 18,000 of us.
Yeah, and there were people who would always stand on Phil Lesh, the bass player's side. There were people who always stand on Jerry Garcia's side. I'm assuming there's people who were standing in the middle with Bob Weir.
Always.
And what I loved is that you seem to have grown with these people. Like, you would see the same people at almost every concert. You would start to recognize people and grow old with them.
Absolutely. When we saw the scenes in the movie of the taper section, these were my friends. These were the people I didn't see myself, but I saw a lot of the people I used to tape with, and these were the same people. Remember, you very rarely had anybody just go to one Dead show, or even 3 shows in a weekend in Albany, New York. They would go to 6 shows on the tour, or you saw the same people all the time. And this is before cell phones. Mm-hmm. This is before internet. So this is largely how we all stayed in touch. We'd just meet up at the shows, and you could pretty much count on it. You might call somebody in Michigan, your buddy in Michigan, and I'm from Ottawa, and I'd call somebody and say, hey, are you doing the tour? He's like, yep, all right, I'll see you in Landover, Maryland. And then we'd meet up in Landover, and for the next 2 weeks, we're traveling together, and we're staying in the same hotels. And there weren't just 20 of us or hundreds, there were thousands of us. And the best was when you would drive from one city to the next, and on all the highway truck stops to get your coffee, you'd see all the same people, and hundreds of them, thousands. It was the most amazing thing. It was seriously the closest thing I could ever imagine to running away and joining the circus and doing it safely. My parents encouraged it because they knew it was safe. They knew there was a lot of craziness, but it was controlled chaos. Mm-hmm. And it was a way for me to see the world. And there was a line in a song in Broke Down Palace, Mama, Mama, many worlds I've come since I first left home. And I remember when the Dead used to sing that, it was always an encore, that's how I felt. I was like, I'm okay, Mom. Mm-hmm. I'm doing okay. And when the Dead played Europe in 1990, and I didn't have enough money to go, my folks loaned me the money, knowing that this might be our son's only chance to go to Europe. And so it's to see the Grateful Dead, but at least he's getting to Europe to go to Paris and London. And so, it was important to them, and they knew that it was an okay place to be. They knew I wasn't in trouble.
I want to go back to something you said about this being pre-internet and cell phone, which is remarkable, not just because you met up with these people and you found your way to Biloxi without a GPS, but more importantly, I want to talk about how this relates to taping. So you mentioned that you were a taper, and if you don't know this, the Grateful Dead are probably the most archived live band of all time. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of tapes of their concerts. But what did this do for the band's legacy and for the fandom, this taping of shows? Were they okay with it?
They were absolutely okay, and they knew, and I don't think it was ever by design, but I think it became a big realization that this was a massive promotional tool. And again, it was not by design. It's just, in Jerry's words, when we're done with it, they can have it. So if they're going to make a tape and want to trade it, Jerry thinks that's crazy because, who would want to listen to our music? But Jerry used to record bluegrass bands in 1959, 60, 61 and listen to them. So I think to a level he did get it. But we used to trade tapes, and that's how we would know that, oh my God, we got to see the whole tour because I just heard 10 shows in a row and they were so amazing. I need to go to the next 10.
Right.
And so it was the thing that kept us all interested. And you knew that no matter how many tapes you had, the next live show was going to be even better.
It's cool because I whenever I go to music conferences, I often hear people say this, especially in 2017, 2016. And people will say stuff like, here's how the music industry works now. Your CD is your calling card, and you should be focused on your live show, and that's how you make money. And as if it's this new thing. And when I was watching the Grateful Dead documentary last night, the idea of the live show being how you make your dough, how you are a musician, and the record just being something you kind of give away, is kind of prescient how the Grateful Dead did it. They were kind of the first, am I right?
It's exactly that. They made the records, their new songs were on them, and that's great. And they never did very well. They did okay.
Yeah.
But their live shows always sold out. Really, from 1969, 70 onwards, they could consistently sell any venue in the country they wanted.
And that in many ways, they were a sign of the times when it came to the music industry.
Very much so. And they were outside of it, for sure, but they did things that the music industry later caught on to and said, you know what, that's a good thing.
I I want to talk a little bit about, if you're just tuning in, by the way, I'm speaking with David Lemeiux. We're talking and nerding out a little bit about the Grateful Dead. David's the music supervisor of the new Grateful Dead documentary, The Long Strange Trip. You mentioned that your parents were okay. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos to be allowed to go to these shows. However, there are moments in the documentary where you see that things got a little bit dark at these shows. Can you paint me a picture of how crazy it might have gotten in the parking lot, or it might have gotten at the shows, at Grateful Dead shows?
It was interesting. I stopped going to shows in '93, and it was largely because of that I could feel a darker energy coming in. The band was playing a little bit less consistently great, and I noticed that. And I was 22 years old in '93, and I could feel that the music wasn't where it was even 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And
Did it feel dangerous? Did you feel?
It felt less controlled. More people were coming to the shows not for the music. They were coming to party in the parking lot, and they weren't Grateful Dead fans, and they didn't necessarily bring that Grateful Dead ethos that Deadheads followed, which is to say, take care of everybody. Take care of that guy over there, and everybody takes care of each other. You got less of a feeling of that.
But at one point, Phil Lesh, the bass player, signed a letter to fans, to Grateful Dead fans, asking them to obey and to behave. But Jerry Garcia wouldn't sign it. Why not?
Jerry didn't want. He was an anti-authoritarian, and Jerry did not want to tell people what to do. And as it turned out, that letter, I was seeing shows when those letters were coming out in 89, 90, 91, 92, and they really had no impact. People still wanted to come to these shows because the people who were coming to the shows without tickets to party in the parking lot and really cause a lot of the problems, they weren't necessarily Deadheads.
Right.
So they weren't people who would follow. I didn't go if I didn't have a ticket. I remember one time I was walking out the door to go to a Dead show. I couldn't find my tickets. I didn't go to the show. I was like, and I found the tickets a week later.
Wow.
So, but it was that kind of thing. I was like, I respected that. I came up with the Grateful Dead, and this was part of who I was. And there were thousands of us like that, but there were thousands who weren't. And so I did feel that controlled chaos was a little less controlled. And I wouldn't say I felt unsafe. I felt less comfortable. And it wasn't, even again, 5 years earlier, I felt a very big difference.
One theme that comes up throughout from the beginning of this 4-hour documentary to the end is that the Grateful Dead may have become a bit of a Frankenstein's monster for Jerry Garcia. That he in many ways created this group along with Pigpen. And he sometimes felt trapped by his own creation, that he couldn't get away from the band even when he felt he needed to. And when the band would take a break, he would still go on the road. To what extent do you think the Grateful Dead became a Frankenstein's monster for Jerry Garcia?
I think... I don't know when it happened, but it definitely did happen.
It did happen?
And absolutely. Jerry felt a major obligation to go out with the Grateful Dead, even though there's a moment when his former girlfriend in the mid-'90s, early '90s, said that Jerry said, you know what? I just want to give up the Grateful Dead. I want to live off my ice cream money, the royalties from the Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And he said, that's all I need.
Cherry Garcia.
Cherry Garcia. He said, that's all I need. He said, I need to get away from this. And then the reality set in that he's got the obligation to the other 5 guys in the band, and then the other 50 employees and the 20,000 people out there watching the show. That was a major obligation to him that he took. I guess he took it so seriously that he felt the need to do it, and he couldn't go out. He couldn't go to the store to get stuff. He'd get recognized. He'd get mobbed, and I don't think it was a very fun existence for him.
Last night when I went to the show, I went to see the documentary. I was surrounded by Deadheads, and as you said, and I am one of those Grateful Dead fans who was too young to ever see a Grateful Dead show, so I've never seen them live. So I want to thank you first and foremost. Like, my Grateful Dead fandom comes from people like you. If it wasn't for you guys collecting tapes, I wouldn't be a Grateful Dead fan. So thank you. But I also want to say this: there were people I spoke to when I was in line. I just kind of decided to ask around. I said, are you a big Grateful Dead fan? And you said, yeah. There's people there who have been to 200, 300 Grateful Dead shows. There were also people there who did not know the Grateful Dead at all. So ultimately, when you watch this documentary, and if you're listening to this and you don't know the Grateful Dead at all, you can still get into this documentary. What is it about the Grateful Dead story that you think people, even non-Deadheads, people who don't care about the band, are connecting with in this film?
I had a good friend from film school. I went to Concordia Film School, and this was the most talented filmmaker. I went to film school. He came last night, and I haven't seen the guy in 20 years. And he I think admittedly said, I hate the Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
And he came out as not only a Grateful Dead fan, a Deadhead, he came out with a huge appreciation of what the scene was. And I think there's such an arc to the story that the Grateful Dead started out with absolutely really no designs on success. All they wanted to do was have fun, make a living so they didn't have to go get a job. And that was it. And then it grew and grew and grew and became this unwieldy thing. And then, as you say, in the later years, it became darker. And it is this incredible, I think, story arc that is not necessarily just about Jerry, it's about Grateful Dead. And it also, I think, it ends in 1995, the movie does, and that's when the Grateful Dead ended, when Jerry Garcia died. But I think, as the director said this morning, it was a really great way to say it, that he feels by ending in 95, he's handing off the baton to all of us to go out and create something, whether that's music or whether that's art or whether it's a job or whatever it is, or a family, anything, just keep something going. And that's the feeling I got, is that I had somebody say that, man, that end of the film is a real downer. I was like, I didn't see it that way at all. I saw it, again, as a major arc in a real arc of ups and downs, and then a big down at the end. But what it left us with is, here we are 22 years later, talking about it very positively because it's left this legacy. And this is the thing. Jerry said, I don't want to leave anything behind, but he did. And he left behind the tapes, and that's where we come in to make these movies and put out these archival CDs.
David, I want to thank you so much for coming in today.
Absolutely my pleasure.